Well, let's get some more analysis, and we can speak now to Crystal Fleming, who is a professor of Sociology and Africana Studies at Stony Brook University, who joins us now from New York. First of all, Professor, I just want to ask you, one French politician, in fact, the leader of the Green Party here, said that, quote, what I see on this video is the execution by the police of a 17-year-old kid in France in 2023 in broad daylight. I heard a policeman lie, his colleague lie, the prosecutor lie, and the media lie. You get the feeling that our police is becoming like America's. Can I just start by asking you for your reaction to that?
Well, first, let me express my condolences to the family of Nahel and his loved ones. I have been traveling to France for over 20 years, and I can attest that the situation for French people of Arab origin, for French Black people as well, has only gotten worse with regards to police violence. You can say that it looks quite similar to what happens on a very frequent basis here in the U.S., with one important difference, and that is when this happens in the United States, French authorities, French activists, we see French liberals and leftists call out racism, rightly call it out, when it happens in the U.S. And when these things happen in France, and unfortunately, the statistics and studies have shown it's been happening. The killing of French people by police has been on the rise. Last year, 2022 was a record year, with most of those killings targeting Arab and Black people. When this happens in France, we do not see that same clarity conviction in calling it out as racism. And in fact, we see quite the opposite. We see denial at every level of authority, every level of the government in France. And frankly, as a scholar of racism, as a concerned citizen of the world, as a human being, I am disgusted by the level of denial and the hubris and arrogance that the particular form of French racism takes. You know, I think of some strange parallels to the Titan disaster that just happened. We had all the experts saying this will get people killed. So many warnings coming from those who study these issues. It was a disaster that was preventable and predictable, and a teenager got killed needlessly. So again, we see the impact, the deadly impact of denial and arrogance and hubris. And I really wonder how many more people have to experience this level of brutality before there is an acknowledgement that systemic racism in France is real and needs to be addressed.
Sure, and obviously addressing systemic racism in any country is going to take time. Let's talk about the longer term and the shorter term. Let's first talk about the short term. What do the authorities here in France, if you could advise them, what do they need to say? What sort of things do they need to do if they want to make sure that the situation is calmed down as quickly as possible, that there isn't violence on the streets across the Paris suburbs and perhaps the suburbs of other major French cities as well? How would you advise them to proceed?
My sincere and expert advising would be to address and acknowledge the violence caused by the French state itself involving the police, which is directed in a discriminatory fashion against racialized minorities in that country. And I think, you know, we are far beyond the point where discourse and words are enough. We need to see actual policies that, again, have to begin with an acknowledgement of reality. I read that President Macron said that what happened to Nahel was inexcusable and inexplicable. But I have to tell you, he's only right about one of those things. It is inexplicable. It is inexcusable. It is not inexplicable. This isn't rocket science. It's racism. And until the French president, the government, and those in positions of authority are willing to acknowledge that and then enact policies to address it, begin to take those steps, unfortunately, we will see the continued escalation of these forms of violence. And I'm not talking about the violence that you see on your screen. In fact, I'm not sure that I would call a fire violence. What is violence is what happens when police take the life of a teenage youth for no reason other than the fact that they have been enabled and empowered to do so by the authorities. So again, my number one suggestion and advice, which comes from experts and advocates on the ground in France, is that we need to move beyond discourse to an acknowledgement of reality and to listen to the human rights organizations, the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, the experts that have been pointing this out, warning France for years that action needs to be taken to address and acknowledge systemic racism in France.
Yeah, I'm being told that we're out of time. I'd love to ask you some more questions, but I just want to make that point that, the fact that a camera phone was used here to prove that the police weren't telling the truth. The police really can't think they're going to get away with making up convenient versions of events any longer. And that draws parallels with some stories from the United States from the last couple of years as well. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much. Thank you, Crystal Fleming, Professor of Sociology at Stony Brook University in New York. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.